Hello, 3 concurrent viewers, one of which is J. Challenge is, full stop, he says, who has got a better solution? Well, who? You already know that I say I have the best solution. Now, I have an Ask FM account. Jay has an Ask FM account. He doesn't like using his. He doesn't like answering questions on his because, well, nobody's looking. That's what he doesn't like. He prefers talking shit on my channel. But that is a problem not confined to him, of course. Quite a few people. I've managed to persuade a few people to go on Ask FM, but they don't like using it. And one of the reasons they give is nobody's watching. Nobody cares. But that's not the point of it, is it? We have to consider the medium that is YouTube, which is recording voices. And Jay is of the school of thought that says, well, as long as you've got a bluff, confident manner like me, you can get away with any bullshit. And this is what I excel at, so as long as I can go on your channel and get people who don't care about the arguments to listen to me, I win. We know Jay doesn't care about the arguments because he doesn't understand the arguments. He thinks it's overall impression that matters. You know, the way you spout your bullshit. Your accent, your class. Who cares about the arguments? And sad to say, because bumping along at the bottom with plebs, people like that are in the majority. I'm afraid, not just in the alt-right, but in the political establishment. They don't seem to know how to deconstruct an argument anymore, and I think Ask FM is a very good tool for deconstructing people's arguments. Now, nobody wants to join me there because they don't want their arguments deconstructed. Jay doesn't want to be seen to be answering any questions of mine because that would expose his answers for the bullshit they are. So he doesn't want to do that. Jen, his other half, doesn't want to do that either. But I've blocked her. Not because I hate her or anything, but I think both of them, both Jay and Jen, like interacting with me. And then when I look back on, what they say, it's all shit. Nothing is advanced, the same old arguments are repeated ad nauseum, the same form of words. And because they take place privately, no one gets to see what bullshit they are. And I'm saying, make it public. Hi, Jen. Hi, Jen. Good to see you. It's great, I just sort of sit here and I think, I say these names, and they'll come to me. They'll come to me like, I don't know, birds or pets, kitty cats. And Jay, unfortunately, is one of those people who only see success in material terms. He doesn't think about the future. He doesn't believe in doing things for the principle of it. He's been recorded to say things like, what does caring what happens to your country do? What good does it do? It doesn't do you any good immediately. So basically he's saying he ain't doing anything that doesn't give him an immediate benefit. So that's why he didn't study for his exams. He will be this animal who only thinks in the short term. We know animals who only care about food and sex and shelter, and they don't think of the future. And that's why they don't build civilizations. And Jay is saying, let's be like non-human animals. Let's think in the short term. Let's not care about posterity. Let them sort out our shit. Who cares about how they think of us when we're dead? Who gives a shit? Unfortunately, many people think like him, and they can't see any problem in it because we live in a culture of atheism. And atheism is nihilism, and nihilism means not caring what happens to your society after you are dead. So why does Jay pretend he cares about anything? Because it gets him attention. He pretends to be Christian. He LARPs as a Christian to get his ideas or attention. That's why he says, I'm Christian. We're a Christian nation. And to say that means more moral authority. Just the word Christian nation means, better than atheist nation, nihilist nation. So even with Jay's poor understanding of the meaning of words, he has an idea that if he says certain words, it will cloak his words with a kind of moral authority. And that will distract the stupider from the merits of the arguments. But anyway, nobody cares about the merits of the arguments. But Jay has the excuse of not being educated. He didn't care enough about his studies to do well in his GCSEs. That's because children are short-termist, aren't they? They only care about fun and parties and food and sweets and games and toys. It's adults who should, think of their future on their behalves, and if your parents don't bother with you, then basically you're fucked. Do whatever you want, kiddo. Who cares? Eat sweets until you're sick. Go into people's cars. Who cares about you? Unfortunately, so many parents have abdicated responsibility of their children. They think, well, if they live to adulthood, and, well, I've done a good job, haven't I? And that's what consistently low standards has brought you to, listening to me. So people who don't care about the arguments think YouTube is their medium, so I can say my words and then they can, yak back at me in a bluff, confident manner, and the people who like their voices and like the general impression of the picture they paint. So nobody will be thinking that arguments matter, and my whole purpose is to impress on people that the arguments matter and the ability we have to evaluate arguments matter. So I spent months trying to tell Jay the difference between valid and sound arguments, and then finally he pretended to understand. And all this came about because there was this argument between John Vance and Connaughts, and he said, obviously Connaughts won. Because as far as he was concerned, Connaughts was, the one in a higher social class who hates Muslims, while John Vance is now a Muslim convert and is working class, and even though Jay's lower middle class, I guess. Or he's going to say, I'm middle class. I don't know. Let him decide what class. But anyway, he feels that he's not a blue-collar worker, while John is. And it's like, okay, John's a pleb, to put it that way. And Connaughts isn't. And Jay said, well, obviously Connaughts won the argument. And I said, okay, why do you think he won the argument? And what was, the clincher of the argument? And I asked him this question for months. Last year, months and months and months I asked. And Jay was incapable of telling me what it was. It's still on my blog. He couldn't say, he really couldn't, and I think he even tried to go through it, and then it was a terrible, ordeal for him. And I doubt that he could, even after the trauma he was subjected to in trying to get his head round the difference between valid and sound arguments, it's completely left his mind. And he's back to the position of, well, if you have a bluff, confident manner and enough retards agree with you or like the cut of your jib, then you won, haven't you? Jen, who ought to know better, being a graduate in maths and physics at Ottawa University, you would have thought that she'd care, but she doesn't. And also we know that the political establishment who runs our countries, they don't either. But I have discovered a way of objectively evaluating the quality of arguments. And this is simply by looking at the truth and logic and morality of each sentence. And of course I want this experiment to have greater participation than currently. It's possible, and I'm sure people like Jay and Jen won't cooperate because they don't want the poverty of their arguments to be exposed very quickly indeed, because without their voices, without their whole persona infusing their non-existent arguments, they know they won't be able to win. None of their positions are morally or intellectually defensible anyway, and they don't want this fact to be exposed, and that's why they won't cooperate. But why then do they engage with me privately? I think there's some deep-seated psychological gratification, even though they know after the exchange that neither party has changed their mind. So what is the purpose of this exchange? I think it's simply you get to hear the sound of your own voice, you get to hear your position, you get to feel that, well, they haven't convinced me, and you think you won. So it's entirely subjective, but probably maybe I fall into that error. But I try not to, because I ask questions. And when the answer doesn't satisfy me, or when it's obviously just nonsense, then they haven't won. And of course the best kind of answer is a question that you cannot answer honestly, but to which the answer is obvious. I know I am mistress of asking those kinds of questions. I remember this recent stream that Jen and I were in, with Connops as moderator, and Jen pointedly refused to answer any of my questions. And then claimed she'd won, or that Connops was a very poor moderator. But poor Connops, he could only, step in when if one of us was very badly, badly behaved, and we were perfectly behaved. We just, answered the questions, and really, when Jen gave her word salad answer, he didn't interrupt. But then, I thought, Jen, sometimes you want somebody to take an interest in your answer, instead of just letting you carry on with your word salad for paragraphs and paragraphs. Because I've seen these exchanges on TV when the journalist is completely disengaged from his subject. So he's got, a list of written questions, he reads them out, they are answered, and he doesn't engage at all. And this is really sleep-inducing. So it doesn't matter what the answer is. He'll just ask the next question. So really, if there were any justice in the world, I would have a job in the BBC, or some similar media outlet. And it is the measure of the sacrifice I've made that I bump along at the bottom with you lot. And of course my martyrdom increases the less you care that I have. So you may well ask, well, what do I want from you? All I want is to have some show of submission, not to me, but to truth, logic, and morality. And this, it seems, is something that is too much for you. Your intellect does not allow you to comprehend the nature of truth, logic, and morality, and how all these three ideas should reign supreme over your pathetic emotions and your silly beliefs and views. If what you believe in is based on falsehood, then what you believe is wrong. If what you believe is logical, turns out to be immoral, then you shouldn't do it. But it seems you are incapable of having this kind of discussion, and really, in a way, it's a waste of time talking to a bunch of mentally ill, undereducated, mentally deficient people who should never have had the vote anyway. Particularly people who say, I'm not going to change my mind, whatever the facts or the logic or the principles you invoke. But will things be any better if I spoke to the political establishment, would they be able to do this very little that I hope and expect of you? I suspect not. And that's why all the institutions of state in the West are morally rotten, and you should know about this, and you should care about it, but I know you don't. So it doesn't matter if I win or lose. As far as I'm concerned, I've done what I could, I've said all I could say as clearly as possible. The evidence of my track record is it's online. And all you're saying is, you haven't got an army, Claire. You haven't got the money to bribe us or the violence to threaten us, and you won't tell us the lies we want to hear. Damn right I won't. You have so many others to go to, so I don't even know why you come back. So back to Ask FM. If you really are confident about your arguments, then use that to attack me. You can answer. You can even keep a record of the questions you ask me in case you fear that I won't answer them. And then there are threads, so people can read the questions and answers on a particular starter question, and they can evaluate the quality of the questions and answers and decide who won the argument, all without bothering anyone on YouTube at all. Jay won't do it, Vincent won't do it, Jen won't do it. I mean, I'm actually giving her a chance because she can at least have a chance to think, She can think of a question, then she can think carefully about her answer, but she won't because it's all about people listening to her voice. The idea of looking at chat and immediate response is too addictive. She can't do it in isolation. And it won't be as controlled as a blog, so, I can't post something and it'll be deleted. Because a property, well, I suppose you can delete the answers. Yeah, you can delete your own answers. That would be a sad thing to do. But you can actually edit your answers too after you've answered them. So that would be, useful. So it's more an exercise in thought than, bullshitting. I'll read the chat now. Hi, Spaceman. Oh, Spaceman has read the Quran, and he quotes chapter 53, verse 38, that no laden one shall bear another's load, no one shall bear another's burden. Yeah, that means no priesthood. Spacepan, no, it doesn't mean that taxation is theft, because there is an Islamic rate of taxation, and it is 20%, 1/5. Spaceman says any political solution that involves taking women's rights away is not viable in Western democracy. Well, kick out democracy and then we'll have rational government. The solution is simple. I've been saying that for years anyway. I've been proposing a one-party state for a long time. What did actually? I'll give you the link because you're quite reasonable, really, aren't you, Spacepan? Not like the others. So why do you think that one of your... I did catch a little bit of your incel stream, Spacepan. You didn't sound like me at all. I don't know why anybody thought... Or was it because of the things he was saying? Yes, okay, a fairly interesting discussion about whether the West is a place or a political a state of mind, perhaps one should say. You know, whether the West is actually a physical location. It isn't, because, well, west of what? You know, west of Asia, but then you have Australasia, and that's part of the West. It's part of the Anglosphere. So Jen says, Doolittle retreats away from debate. Well, I know he can barely express himself, so that doesn't surprise me at all. We have streamed, I don't know how many hundreds of hours we have streamed together, Jen. But the problem with you is that you never concede when you've lost the argument. You insist something went wrong, or you didn't rig the system enough. And because your arguments are basically incoherent and incomprehensible and nobody really cares, nobody argues about it. You know, is God personal or impersonal? Most people don't even believe in God anyway, so they think debating on his personal or impersonal character is just a stupid waste of time. So it's impossible to get anyone, even if they hate you, to go through that ridiculous debate we had. But what is clear is that Jen doesn't like being asked questions by me. Gosh, so many comments, I can barely keep up. Well, laden spaceman means burden, right? Beast of burden, that kind of thing. So no man... okay, that's what... There'll be other translations. 3853, did you say? I guess you're not joining me now, right? I've sent you the link on Facebook. Let me just find where it is. Did you say 3853? 5338. So you're at chapter... Are you at chapter 38 now, are you? That sounds promising, Spacepan. So I'm going to Corpus Quran, and I guess that's the best place if you want about 7 translations of the same verse. Is it 3853 you said? Because it doesn't read like it. '53:38. Sorry, I got transposed that.
Hey, I'm in here now.
Hi.
I had to set up, I just found out, I learned how to use my AirPods as headphones with my computer, and it's very exciting because I can wave my arms around, and I can spin around, and I can get up and walk around, and there's no cord. It's very nice.
Oh, good.
But the Quran verse I sent is because I just I have a habit. I just go to like the random translation, or I go to the random verse. That's all. So I just literally read a random verse out of context.
Oh, right.
Sometimes from the Bible, sometimes from the Quran. So sorry, I got your hopes up.
Okay,
You're actually quite
not
a disappointment.
Chapter 53. Yeah. So it's quite a short verse. So I'll just say okay. The first translation, it says that no bearer of burdens will bear the burden of another. That no laden one shall bear another's load. Namely, that no bearer of burdens can bear the burden of another. Yeah, so, and the most helpful translation is by Muhammad Sawad that says, certainly no one will bear the responsibility of the sins of another. And this means no priesthood who's able to forgive you on behalf of God, as was commonly the practice of the Catholic Church because
So
it obviously
basically, yeah,
leads to
it's an
corruption.
anti-indulgent. It's an anti-indulgence verse, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because basically the Catholic Church just monetized fear of hell, and then they created purgatory. To put these infants who could never have sinned but who died in infancy before baptism. To get parents to baptize their children ASAP, so they'd have to pay the priest for the baptism ceremony. You know, so they create all these things in order to monetize people's fears and of course indulgences for rich people who can afford such things. And recently I've discovered that you could get priests or monks to say prayers for you after you are dead, if you're pretty sure you're going to hell. And you probably do think you'll probably go to hell if you're some politician, some baron, some king. So you can pay them to say prayers to you forever just to be on the safe side, you know.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I guess it's just another application of Pascal's wager. Like, what do you got to lose by throwing some shekels that way? Although I suppose you are literally losing the money in that sense. But it is funny how like the Western legal systems have basically recreated the indulgence systems through having a complicated legal system that basically requires you to spend a bunch of money.
Yeah, and,
I
and,
guess,
and
yeah, maybe America really is based on Judeo-Christian values. I always thought that was an idiotic claim, but when I look at the legal system, maybe there's something to it.
well, of course. I mean, I don't see how you can even deny it or why it's controversial. This was something that, I learned, when I was still doing history, and if your official religion is the Bible containing the Old and New Testament, I don't see how you can deny it. Why
Well,
would
you,
you
you mean
deny
that
it?
America would be based on Judeo-Christian values?
Well, in the sense that people talk about God, and America still thinks of itself as a Christian nation. And all American presidents have at least pretended to be Christian,
Well, and
and
that's
they,
the
they,
thing,
they
though. You
swear on
qualify it.
Bibles in their courts and things, which they
Right.
still
Well,
do in
and
the
that's the
UK.
thing, though, is I don't think they're real Christians. I think it's a lot of pomp and circumstance, right? It's a lot of kind of pretending. It's a lot of ceremony. It's just pageantry, really. And if you look at like the actual Constitution, you don't see honor no God before me, honor thy father and mother, thou shalt not covet, right? Like that right there, that's like four of the Ten Commandments, and like no sign of them are in the Constitution, right? Like
Well,
most
but
of
there
these
is
religious
in
laws don't
the
really make the cut.
but in the Declaration of Independence, isn't there a verse that says man is everywhere, man is created equal?
Right, they have rights endowed by their creator. Although, the Declaration of Independence is technically not even a legal document.
Yeah,
It's like a
but there isn't
historically
a
important document, but there's nothing legally binding about it. And you
no.
see all that language kind of stripped out in the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean the Jefferson Bible is interesting in that regard because I think it's a precursor of secular Koranism, because but anyway we can talk about that maybe another time. Have you considered the Jefferson Bible and what it's meant to tell us?
No, I'm actually not familiar with how exactly it's different.
And basically Jefferson took out all these stories and just left the moral principles. So he left out all the miracles and whatever in the New Testament, and said these are the precepts we should live by. And there weren't that many of them, and I think he's implicitly asking us to do the same to the Quran, and then make the obvious comparison. That's a particular view of mine. I'm not claiming I've read it anywhere or you know but
I
I mean,
see. So
okay.
it's basically an abridged Bible that makes it, I guess, readable. I
Um,
mean, I get that that's not a charitable interpretation, but that's that's the utility I would get out of it.
yeah,
Because
because
otherwise, it certainly drags on.
mm,
Like maybe God needed an editor.
yeah, well, even Christians don't claim that Christ wrote the New Testament, but Jews and Muslims are supposed to believe that the Torah and the Quran are actually from God. So it's a different different kind of scripture, I suppose. But why do you find it difficult to believe that America is? Okay, what do you understand when Americans say we are a proposition nation?
Or what you said, a proper what
A
nation?
proposition nation.
A, a proposition nation? I don't think I've heard that term before. Am I
Oh, okay.
ignorant?
I remember, or do I mean propositional nation?
When
Sorry,
I Google proposition nation, the first thing I
propositional
get is
nation.
American
Yeah.
Renaissance arguing it's not. So I guess this is I guess there's hot takes on both sides. I've literally never heard this term.
Oh, okay. So
Chad,
I wonder who
am
says
I an
it
idiot?
actually.
Am I like a total? Should I have heard this before?
Well, it's in the American conservative. I think it basically. Uh, okay. This comes from the American conservative. I'll give you the link in the Hangout chat.
Yeah, I'm kind of skimming through that. I forget American Renaissance. They have ANCAP colors, but aren't they? Are they like a Wignat site? I feel like they would have been not the first result if that was the case. Who are they?
Well, I think
Who
that they're
are
kind
these?
of
Who's American Renaissance?
nationalist and
Oh, this is Duder's thing. Okay. Well, he what's his name? Jared Taylor, right? This is his thing. I think
no,
Jared Taylor
I think
generally
they're quite
seems really
friendly
reasonable.
with Yoram Hazoni. They reviewed his book, The Virtue of Nationalism. So I think there's some kind of informal alliance.
Well, yeah, it says it's run by him and some others, and like it has like a video featuring him on their About Us page here. So it's like his website. I'm surprised this wasn't like memory hold. But well, I guess I'll take a look at that. I got many tabs open. I have all kinds of things to look into.
Yeah, but I first
We're doing my
remember
research.
Ann Coulter
But yeah, I
saying
don't know why I've never heard this before. So what Ann Coulter said, it's a proposition nation.
propositional nation, and I thought that there was a sort of and it somehow linked to American exceptionalism. So I understand by this that the Constitution created a particular kind of person that obviously subscribes to all these definitions
Is this like
about
civic nationalism? Is that kind of what we're looking at? All I'm finding is a bunch of people who are like really upset at this idea that America is a proposition nation. I'm just finding a lot of, let's see.
um,
I hate that there's not just like a definition. Why is everything?
yeah, I actually I should have looked it up, but I wasn't planning to talk about it when I started the stream, and this is a kind of I guess I imagine Americans would understand it or argue about it, but
I mean, I've
it is a
probably
vague
heard of the
term.
argument stated in as many words, for just not given this label.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up.
Well,
But
okay, I'll
I
look
think
into
it's
it. I'm glad you
okay.
mentioned it.
What I understand is from the word is that it's a proposition is a proposal. A proposal is based on a statement contained in the American Constitution, and I think it is about equality. And I think people are just questioning the whole caboodle of egalitarianism and liberalism now, and because they sense it's not working, and it's like, what do these words even mean?
Well, and that's the issue we have is it's one of the reasons I'm not a fan of like constitutional governments of any kind, because we literally saw with America the whole point was to set up a libertarian minarchist state to have the smallest possible government ever, and it's become the opposite. And all of our judges, our entire legal community is just based on bad incentives that cause them to, I think, very deliberately. I don't think that they're doing it in like good faith or because they're good people. I think they're like actually horrible people that are legitimately lying and twisting words and like deliberately playing it as a game. And as a result of all of their precedents have just completely ruined like anything in the Constitution. That's why like I was listening to do you ever watch Ramsey Paul's show, Happy Homelands?
Sometimes I haven't for quite a while.
Recently, he switched co-hosts instead of Tina. Now he has Sticks on there,
Mm-hmm.
which I kind
I
of
can't stand him.
I prefer Tina. I liked her. I thought they were a nice balance. But
Mm-hmm.
you're not a fan of Sticks. My
No.
issue with Sticks is he's one of these libertarian minarchists, which I
I thought
hate
I
that
thought you
standpoint.
I thought you were a libertarian minarchist, aren't you?
No, I'm an ANCAP.
Oh, okay, that's a difference. Okay, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The anarcho-capitalists, we say no government. The minarchists say we need to have the absolute smallest government. So they're just a tiny smidgen to the left of us. But that smidgen is everything. But anyway, he was talking about if he was president, he would expand the Constitution, like expand the Bill of Rights and make things more clear. And it's so ridiculous to me that anyone believes there's literally any way you could write these documents that is not going to get exploited later.
Yeah, because Nietzsche said interpretation is not a function of truth, but that of power. So you can interpret, anything any way you like, which is why Americans got so triggered about the Kavanaugh hearings and why the Democrats pulled out all the stops to prevent Trump from getting his conservative judge.
Oh yeah, they literally try to the Democrats tried to use a lying whore to overthrow the US government. And like
Yeah.
that just happened in plain sight. And then everybody points to me like I'm the crazy one for saying we don't need government. And I'm like, this is your government. This is what it does. The idea that this is somehow good or necessary or helpful for society at all, I think is just like bong hit retarded nonsense.
Okay, so I've found the more information about the idea of America being a proposition nation, and it's all related to American exceptionalism, and it's the idea that the history of the United States is inherently different from that of other nations. It didn't just sort of come about. Apparently, it's like it's a new nation because it was settled, and it was the settlers that made the nation, not the people already there who were, genocided and exterminated basically and marginalized. It was taken over by another nation. It's like kind of like one can think of Jews in Canaan, right? Because the Canaan was already occupied by all these Gentiles and idolaters, and the Jews who were slaves that left Egypt basically took them over. And they're saying, we have a right to, we were, protected by God, and that's why we managed to do this clearly impossible thing of being landless slaves who finally settled the Canaan. So the second
Well,
idea,
so you'd have to. I'm wondering though, are the Canaanites comparable to all the disparate tribes in America? Because the issue with like the reason, for
yeah,
example, like Ann Coulter is specific about saying America wasn't conquered, it was settled, is that there wasn't any established nation, there was no established property rights or any respect for it in America beforehand. So by that standard, these settlers who came in, they're on equal moral standing as all the other natives. They're just another native tribe that showed up later and they're white. And basically, a lot of the land procured by trade, some of it not so much. But all things being equal, like it's not like they were taking land from people who had established property rights or
really, yeah.
or granted that to their citizens. But I wonder, the Canaanites, did they have a civilization and get
Yes.
conquered? Because
Yeah,
that
I
would
mean,
make it
like
dramatically
Jericho, and,
different.
the walls of Jericho, it was a city, it was a
Yeah,
civilization.
you said walls. Did the natives have many walls? They had
No,
some
but I mean,
web walls,
basically, you,
right?
you took them
But
over because they were primitive tribespeople who were no match for, your bioterror weapons of, smallpox infected blankets that you would give to them, and your weapons and your, greater organized organizational capability, and also you had a stronger idea of what you could do. I mean, Europe was fighting all those wars, so even in warfare, technology culture and everything. So it was just easy to take over the entire continent. And so I suppose you could sort of say that, this is our duty, our destiny, and this is contained in the Gettysburg Address, saying that America
The
has a unique
Gettysburg Address was I thought
mission
no,
to
that was
transform the world.
Lincoln. Lincoln had the Gettysburg Address like after the Civil War, I think.
So and it contained the idea that Americans have a duty to ensure government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Yeah, well, ironically, the Constitution itself, and especially the Bill of Rights, are embodiments of, a contradiction in that. But
Well,
there was something Jen had said earlier in the chat, on like clarifying what a proposition nation is. She said, the U.S. is a proposition nation in the sense it will exist as a nation for so long as people believe in the liberalism upon which it was founded. And I think that kind of makes so that to me does seem like it's kind of in line with the CivNat like origin of the state, right? That rather than it being based on kind of like inherited like property rights over many generations, instead what we're looking at is
I do think ultimately
sorry, there's a light flashing and I realize it's my fucking AirPod and I'm like, why is there a light
Oh, right.
flashing?
Huh.
Sorry, that's
Yeah.
but then also no, she said there's no evidence whatsoever that Jews were ever enslaved in Egypt. That's the first I've heard that. I have no idea.
Well, I mean, this is a narrative. I mean, we can't really go against it because, it's too established. It's in the Torah. And, okay, people who don't like Jews will say, well, you're not God's chosen people. You're not, who you say you are. You're not even Jews. They were extinct. They can say all these things, but, for practical purposes, we have to deal with things as they are.
I'm inclined to doubt anything that's in like an Abrahamic source. And I get it, maybe that's mean spirited and biased, but I'm inclined to
Yeah.
doubt
Oh
anything.
no, but I mean, of course, we can doubt whatever, but I think in trying to get people to do what they're supposed to do, you have to refer them to their principles. So it's just that if I did want to win an argument against you, well, of course I do, but I'd say, well, according to your own rules, you should agree with the truth of the matter, whatever it is. Rather than me saying, well, this is my worldview, these are my rules, and under my rules, you should agree with me. So that's kind of, well, not going to be as effective as me saying, I know these are your rules, these are the rules that you say you live by, and therefore, according to your rules, you should agree with me anyway.
Right. Like if you're going to engage with someone, there's a combination of, you can have your own view, but eventually you kind of have to step into their world. And that's one thing you can do is you can follow someone's argument, grant all their premises, and kind of see it through. And if their logic isn't sound, you should be able to do that, but then find that it doesn't follow through.
And that
Or you can distill it down to a disagreement of like a matter of fact and the fundamental propositions.
Indeed, and that was why Thomas Jefferson read the Quran, because that there's a White House Quran and it was owned by Jefferson, and he had to go and negotiate with the Barbary pirates, which were being problematic at the time. And presumably that was why he read the Quran. It's like, well, if I know what rules they operate under, I can better negotiate with them. So it seems a very sensible approach for lawyers and psychologists and people like that to take. And okay, you already know, well, I want the Jews to sell secular Koranism for me because I'm saying Islam is no hide and they're supposed to promote, the no hide laws amongst Gentiles. And I'm making the point that the reason why people hate you so much now is because you've not been doing that at all. And it's a law of nature that the less you promote the no hide laws amongst Gentiles, that the more you will be hated. Because these no-hide laws, in my view anyway, create the conditions of good government. And if people feel well governed, they're not going to look around for scapegoats saying, you did this to us, you misgoverned us, you subverted us, you crashed our economy, you whatever.
Right. So you're saying that if Jews were to promote Noahide laws more, then the consequences would be positive enough such that people wouldn't have any ammo for their JQ arguments.
Yeah. But now they confuse Jews with liberals. So that's obviously not right. I mean, if you go to the Torah, it's like you're not meant to be liberal at all. In fact, you're meant to be even stricter than the Muslims that the Westerners are so terrified of. Much stricter because there are far more capital crimes in the Torah than there are in the Quran. So
Well, and I know
if
there's
you
a
go
lot
by
of
the script by scripture, you'll find that Judaism is far stricter than Islam. Well, the New Testament, it doesn't really talk about punishments because Christ never got into a position of power to tell anyone what to do anyway. So there would be no you know no law
Do
that
you
he would
think
have
that
made.
had Jesus like had things turned out differently and he became like Muhammad, right? Like a great leader and conqueror instead of being executed, that then there'd be all this extra stuff in the Bible about like imposition of punishments for certain violations. I mean, it seems like there'd be no room for that based on what he preached before.
Well, I think that there's some doubt as to whether he was um, he wanted Jews to behave better, and he wasn't really interested in Gentiles at all. And then subsequently, I mean, Paul never even met Christ, right? He started off as was it a tax collector and sent to persecute the Christians, and then he had this Damascene con, um, conversion on his way to Damascus, and then I think he got the idea of, well, there's no point trying to convert these Jews to Christianity because the way too established in their laws to suddenly say, oh, Christ can be our savior when he's clearly dead and died horribly and in disgrace. So he thought, well, Gentiles, well, they're a bit stupid, we can sell this idea to them. And so they did. Because I mean, if you compare
Maybe, yeah. I
all
mean,
these different religions, it's like, and I have made a bit of a study of it. It's like it's so much easier to believe in the stories if you are Jewish or Muslim, and even their idea of God kind of doesn't require so much disbelief, a suspension of disbelief, because it's the idea that, oh, God created the universe and now exists outside it as pure spirit, and the Holy Spirit is something that's also present in Judaism, and basically because they're aware of this idea, like, well we already said God now exists outside the universe, so how is he able to achieve miracles? So they got the idea, well he sends his agent, the Holy Spirit, to perform miracles. So Mary was filled with spirit was filled with the Holy Spirit, and then she became pregnant. Because they're still kind of observing their own rules. So
well, yeah, it seems less vulgar, right? If it's a Holy Spirit, it's like an ethereal, shapeless, formless thing, rather than an entity that's been like depicted in like a humanoid form.
yeah, like Zeus coming down to impregnate all these beautiful maidens, and because there are lots of semi-divine people in the Greek myths.
Right, it's kind of following, cut from the same cloth in a way.
Yeah, and his
Jen
wife
took
Hera
issue,
would
it
get
looks like
mad
in
at
the
him.
chat, with this claim that the Jewish laws are stricter because they never imposed it once. I mean, I wonder though. I'm assuming that you like with the Jewish laws, it's within their own in group, right? And that's a key difference.
Well, it's how they define themselves, isn't it? It's like, yeah, Judaism is a religion, but somebody is a Jew if his mother is a Jew, so he can't be a non-practicing Jew, and still claim Jewish privilege. And I think this is what drives everybody crazy. It's like you can have the best of both worlds. It's
Well, the,
almost
the
as if you
issue
don't mind
too.
them claiming a higher status if they, obviously have to observe all these restrictions. But when you see a Jew, chomping on a ham sandwich and going shopping on Saturday, saying he's better than you, it's well, it does create resentment.
Isn't this related to the whole idea that the Ashkenazi are like imposters, right? Which is kind of like what you see in these like liberal leftist elites who they're obviously non-practicing Jews, but they're white when they want to talk about white privilege, but then they're a Jew as soon as they want to censor people.
Yeah,
Like
the
they switch back
chameleon
and forth.
like.
And I imagine a lot of the conservative Jews, I think even heard some of them say they really aren't a fan of people who speak that way.
Exactly, because it's unfair, it's underhanded, and it's claiming privilege while not appearing to deserve it. But it's how Jews define themselves as well. So if you're saying, well, you can't be Jewish if your mother is, and you don't have to observe any of the, keep kosher, etc., then you are going to create a great deal of resentment. And I know that in the olden days, in the times of Spinoza, he said what he said about pantheism, and he was excommunicated. They kicked him out and cursed him for being a heretic, basically, because he was saying, "Oh, pantheism, isn't nature lovely? Isn't Or anyway, he had a kind of heretical philosophy that was at odds with Judaism, and they kicked him out in their Jewish courts, and those were the days when they did do this kind of thing. They did it to Trotsky. But I think the whole idea of kicking people out, excommunicating them, fell out of fashion. I think after World War II, because I guess people just felt so guilty about it, like, oh, we were so mean to the Jews, and then Hitler was so mean to the Jews, and we have to be nice to them now, kind of thing. But really, I think a register of Jews is required for them to at least adhere to their own standards, or they'll just get mixed up with liberals, and they are currently, part of the liberal elite, and the people below the liberal elite don't like their own liberal elite. They already have problems with their own liberals, and if you're Jewish and liberal, you're going to be hated even more. And some Jews already realise this. I mean, particularly the conservative ones. And they also have this ceremony called this festival. It's not even a festival. This day of commemoration called Tisha B'av, and it means a day of mourning. It's like, why do they want to kill us? All through the centuries, there was Pharaoh and the Greeks and the Assyrians, and it's like, oh, and then it's like, oh, these calamities have befallen us. Why, oh why, oh why? So the observant Jews wouldn't find the Nazi pogroms as particularly remarkable. They would have to accept that this is what happens. And that's why they have this, day of commemoration, this day of mourning called Tisha B'Av. And this is not generally known anyway. Everybody knows about Passover, but this is, a kind of minor thing. But obviously an important one if you're going to be properly Jewish and wanting to know why people hate you and why there's no particular logic for it, or they're saying that there's no logic for it.
So then, do you think that when like the SPLC like fudges its statistics to get everybody all riled up about growing hate crimes in the U.S. and in Canada, that's just like the modern incarnation of this practice?
Well, I don't know. I think that the whole idea of multi-party democracy is just so wrong, and it's now coming to the end of the line. And it's not just white people in the West who get like that. If you have two parties vying for power, then obviously they will see themselves as failures if they fail to get elected. So they will feel that they have to pull out all the stops in order to get elected, and use dirty tricks for which they will be hated, resented, and then it will provoke a retaliation of dirty tricks, and a downward cycle of people behaving well in politics.
Well, we also have a median voter problem where the parties particularly in the U.S. where there's like just two major political parties that have consolidated, right? Where the differences between them are very, very unimportant. I consider basically all conservatives and like Republicans and everybody in that camp. They're basically the same as Democrats. There's not really an important distinction there, and the existence of this Republican Party is it's really 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 detrimental because they steal all the talking points from people who would prefer small government or no government, but then they don't do anything meaningful to resist the inevitable.
Well, I think the problem is indiscriminate universal suffrage. I mean, one of the things I remember seeing in Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, and was 3 hours, and I was falling in and out of consciousness, was the idea that at the time it's like blacks having the vote. I mean, whatever next, women having the vote, and this was an actual thing they were talking about. So, once upon a time, the idea of women having the vote is completely wrong. But even, and that is particularly interesting now with lockdown, because a lot of people complaining about lockdown were saying, well, actually, it's the women doing it. The women saying, don't you go out. They're the ones really fussing about it, and the men are going, getting cabin fever and going stir crazy and probably committing all kinds of unspeakable acts of domestic violence because they can't stand being with their women 24/7.
No, I don't think that's true.
Really? Well, I mean,
Yeah, no, the domestic violence industry, it's a big racket. It's all yeah, it's all trumped up. I don't really believe any of that.
but why don't you believe in it? Because if you're stuck with your flatmates, I mean, it doesn't have to be your spouse even, but I guess you would take more liberties with your spouse if you're stuck with them all day and if they're not even being polite to you. I mean, actually, in Malaysia, just before the lockdown, the government actually said, well, ladies, you'll be stuck with your husband quite a lot. We advise you to, if you want him to help around the house, ask him nicely and, dress nicely and put on makeup. and the feminists of Malaysia just went crazy until the government actually apologized for saying that. But I actually thought, well, this is something we have to watch out for. If your husband is with you, or your wife, you'll just want to, say something mean because they're there to be mean to. I mean, I've seen my parents doing that. It's like, it's like, you see cats sometimes and you have more than one and a cat for no particular reason would just hiss at the other. And that kind of reminded me of my parents once upon a time.
So when you get too many cats and they start to fight a little.
Yeah, it's like,
I mean, obviously, I guess there would be more opportunity. Although when we were discussing on my stream that I had earlier today, I think that came up that women are starting to be nicer during all of this. Which, I mean, I get that there's a logical argument, right? When there's more more forced contact in a confined area, that you'd have an expectation. But I'm just a bit cynical because we're looking at multiple decades of feminist fudging statistics regarding domestic violence and just making up bullshit, misandrous conjecture and passing it off as science. Because all of our evidence suggests that it's very reciprocal. There's a lot of men being abused, and
oh
that
yeah, yeah.
problem
I'm sure
is
that
terrible.
happens too. And of course, men are embarrassed to say that that their wife hits them. But I have had men tell me that they were hit, and of course, it's distressing because they don't quite know what to do, and obviously they don't want to hit back. But then if they don't hit back, that it won't stop, and that kind of thing. And I think actually Islam has quite a good solution to that as well. Um, because it does take into account all the things that we might like to do to each other, which means which includes I guess husbands wanting to hit wives, and they're saying, well, you can, only if she's really bad and you've given her sufficient warning, and this is how you ramp it up. So if she does something you really, really hate, you have to admonish her, and if she doesn't improve, you have to sleep apart from her so she knows that she's in a doghouse. And then if she doesn't improve, you can physically chastise her. And I've kind of imposed on that the additional requirement, like, well, if you're really going to, get to that stage of physical chastisement, you could invite friends and family to witness it, so you can, you know, tell people why, she's, well, you can make
So it's
your
all
case
above
against
board. So
her.
it's all
And you
documented.
don't even have to really hate her. You can just actually give her a slap on the wrist. You don't have to hurt her, but because the whole point of inviting your friends and family to witness the wife beating ceremony is to embarrass and humiliate her. So you don't even need to hit her hard at all. You can give her a slap on the wrist if you want. And it's job done. And then, if she still doesn't improve, you can divorce her and say, well, I've tried all, I've gone through, she was given due process, right? No, really, I think you do need to do that. I mean, even employees get, they get a verbal warning, they get a written warning, and they get a final warning.
Yeah, well, what do you think that maybe employers should have have a big company meeting and maybe maybe a literal slap on the wrist and kind of smack around an employee that's oh, what's the word I'm looking for, not
Rogue.
disloyal, but something like that, right? They're not doing their work.
Yeah, but because it's all about breach
A
of
couple minutes
contract.
over, getting back to their break one too many times. But I mean, you see why, like in that context, it would be kind of ridiculous, right? Because there's so many other ways you can punish someone, and it's like I just find it's very similar to when people advocate for like hitting children. You really don't ever need to do that. It's completely irrational, and I think that it's a lot of people who just they're not very creative, and it really seems like they just want to hit people, and they're just kind of looking for an excuse to do it. And I just think across the board it should be discouraged because if you're creative, you can think of all kinds of carrots and all kinds of sticks that don't require you to hit people.
Yeah, but I suppose people been who have suffered corporal punishment said, well, it didn't do me any harm, and look at you lot now. You can't even whatever.
Well, what do you mean like generationally?
Yeah,
Because like
generationally,
hitting,
because the older
spanking and hitting
generation think,
children, it's actually not really gone down by much. It's kind of stayed relatively consistent.
well, I imagine that the older generation thinks that the younger generation are, well, snowflakes, right? They think
Yeah,
we
I mean, I really just think that what it is like boomers and Gen Xers don't want to take responsibility for the communism that they've created in the West and the way that they've kind of squandered a lot of the gains of industrialization and of capitalism. They don't want to take any responsibility for that, and then you see this millennial generation who, we're all told like, oh, go get your 4-year degree, and then, oh, all the professors who are all Gen Xers and boomers are all a bunch of commies. And then they mock and ridicule the millennials for turning out like a bunch of communists. And it's kind of like, like millennials are what, 35 years oldish? Like, yeah, I get it. Like you're an adult by that time. You should take some responsibility. But all the people saying that, it's like I didn't really see the Gen Xers or boomers take much responsibility either.
no. I suppose
I think it's
they
just
don't
bullying. It's
know
just
it.
like bullying because the millennials are younger and smaller and have less money. And I think, there is a lot of resentment among
Yeah,
millennials because, for the amount of work a millennial does, like they're not ever going to achieve access to things like a
yeah, and the
house or a
opportunities
car
are no
with
longer
the
there.
ease that was available, yeah, to Gen Xers and to
Yeah,
boomers. And yeah, yeah, I mean, I don't think that justifies a millennial going full Antifa and like being these just awful like ANCOM pieces of crap basement dwellers. But I think very much so the older generations,
yeah,
they're
but
they're
I
reaping
suppose
what was sown.
they weren't to know in a sense that they couldn't predict what would happen, because
I think
the
they
government
could.
keeps changing the rules, and people when people when there is a rule change, you don't quite see how it's going to be followed or what the consequences are. And if governments make a point of changing rules drastically, dramatically, then there will be unintended consequences. And it's like, why are they even doing it? Why do they just encourage everyone to, go to university? Not everybody is, academically inclined. They're not suitable. They're on courses that, and what's it for? They just become unemployable and with a sense of entitlement, with a Mickey Mouse degree that nobody, that is almost a sign of stupidity. I mean, would anybody give a job to somebody who's a graduate in gender studies? Are they crazy?
Right. Well, I guess a government job or
Yeah,
women
so
action in
why
media or
why did
something.
governments
That's a
even do
proven
that?
point.
I mean, it started with New Labour. I think it all
Well,
started in the
the
UK.
yeah, the reason they do it is because what the government always does is whatever is necessary to expand and consolidate its own power. And if that means making its own citizens poor and full of debt and dependent and stupid and indoctrinated, they're going to do that.
I think it's just
And
short
that's why,
termism.
for example, like Milton Friedman, right? He comes out and he points out, here's how economies work. Here's how things, whatever we can deregulate the economy and have lower taxation, and it's going to help things. And the government basically said, "Oh, hey, do you want to help us out?" And they basically stole like everything that he advocated for and used it as a way to make the state more powerful. And he kind of just became their little like libertarian pet slave, and a lot of libertarians kind of view him as a bit of a traitor, right? Because he got taken advantage of in that way. And this is the issue: is that governments they'll use libertarian approaches to economics in order to promote the economy because they know that we're right. They know that their policies don't work. They know that their policies achieve the opposite. They know that welfare makes people more poor. They know that their war on drugs is going to get people more addicted to drugs. Like they know that everything they do is going to fail, and it's all by design because government attracts people who are evil, satanic, pedophile vampires invariably in every single country. And that's why I have an ANCAP because I say you can't keep the ring of power. You have to just take it away from them.
Well, it's how it's organised, isn't it? I mean, for this, prizes for all idea of everybody, going to university. But they thought it was popular, and it'll give the impression that people are getting smarter and smarter, but particularly British people. But of course, all it meant was a dilution of standards and people getting themselves into debt for nothing and making them and actually destroying their lives in their 3 years at university of sex and drugs and rock and roll because there's a lot of drugs being sold and taken and parties being attended at university. So it's obviously not a good idea. But they're not, it's like they created the student loan system and they're already vested interests. And of course, the universities want, students to attend the university so they get funding and prestige and whatever. And so you go on this ride, this roller coaster ride of debt and lies and nobody wants to take responsibility because it's a democracy. So anyone who thinks, well, okay, I may have been responsible for this mess, but by the time the chickens come home to roost, I'll be out of office anyway. I'll be in another job. I'll be, whatever. And
Yeah, in the
it's
long
all
run, we're
about
all
buck
dead. It's
passing.
it's it's an application of that same principle. They don't care about the long run because they have their one lifespan, and it's you know I
Yeah.
guess in that way they're a little bit different from vampires, which is kind of interesting.
No, but
But
it's a whole system. So it was Henry Truman who, in the 50s, had this motto in the Oval Office, didn't he? The buck stops here. The buck stops at the president. But of course it doesn't if the president changes every 5 years.
yeah, that's a good point. It's great optics though, right? And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Trump right now. He says, drain the swamp, and it's like he was able to undo a lot of stuff because Obama was essentially like an executive action president, right? So you can just undo a lot of that with your own executive actions, but it's leading to a system where he had like a little 4 year like mini dictatorship. Not that it even matters because of the deep state influences. I'd like to believe that Trump was actually trying to oppose some of it, but when I look at his level of spending, it does seem to be that like a lot of these criticisms that he's just very narcissistic, and just doing it to kind of make himself look good or whatever, just kind of putting on a show. Um, it seems that either he doesn't understand that the biggest issue is the US's monetary policy and its debt, and the fact that this US dollar, it's not going to be the reserve currency for much longer. It's going to collapse. There's going to be like a major economic downturn. Nobody takes that seriously, even though
Mm.
that's the number one issue. Ron Paul warned everyone. He was rejected because I do think the Republicans are just controlled opposition for the Democrats. And when you were talking about the way that these colleges are all set up, you think about what's the kind of person they're going to be producing through that system. It's going to be people who are debt slaves, who have resentment, and who are going to try to find an enemy,
Mm.
and their enemy is going to be the Republicans, which is the controlled opposition of the Democrats. And a lot of them, they're smart enough to realize that these leftist neoliberals aren't helping them either. But that's why they'll bring in someone like Bernie Sanders, to
Well,
sort of rally some of the more radical and more progressive voices among that crowd, even a few of the ANCOMs and the Antifa types. And so they'll kind of rally them up, and then you get Bernie Sanders to sort of try to corral some of that vote back into the Democratic Party, because that you ultimately want to get everyone to buy into this idea that they need to vote for the lesser of two evils.
I just really don't understand why Trump, didn't make the best of the situation of the pandemic and declare a state of emergency, like the Japanese did, and then just cancel the elections, and then just, oh, I don't know, the many ways of dealing with his enemies, aren't there?
Well,
And,
okay, but the reason Trump didn't do that is because I think it's a near certainty that he'll win. However, the you know who the Democratic nominee is going to be for 2020, right?
um, well, it's not certain. So who do you,
Well, it's a
who's
trick
going to be
question. It's
Biden's
a trick
running mate?
question.
Hmm?
It's a trick question because on paper, we only have Biden, but the angle that I believe is that has a lot of merit to it. All the pieces are in place. Is that it is a setup for Hillary Clinton to jump in again,
Yeah.
and there is a slim chance that she'll win, actually. And actually, I would
Really?
at this point I would prefer for Hillary Clinton to win,
Really?
because when there's a massive economic collapse afterwards, I want the most left wing, most insane, most corrupt people to be the ones at the helm, so that there's no mistake whatsoever. There's no question that these are the people who caused it. Because if we have 8 years of Trump, it's going to happen during Trump, and then they're going to blame everybody on the right.
I think you should just do, abolish, become a one-party state now.
I mean, we already are.
No,
It's
but
it's
it
a
has to
one
be
party with
official. I
two
think that's the
faces.
problem. That people think, we can, stumble forward with this oligarchy and say it's a one-party state, but it's got to be official so people actually, it'll concentrate people's minds like, well, um, why? And then you say, well, what's the point? What's the point of asking stupid, corrupt people how they want to be bribed and lied to? Don't even bother. Just run the country properly. Don't even ask them. Well, that's what
Yeah, I mean,
China does. That's
honestly,
what China does, and it sort of knows that you can't get away with everything forever because if you're such a bad government that people hate you and will rise up against you, then you haven't gotten away with it. And lots of Chinese emperors did fall because they governed so badly that the mandate of heaven was withdrawn. So you know
I mean, yeah, I would actually argue that the Chinese government, for whatever its flaws are, probably on average cares more about its people than people in the American government.
yeah, because
I don't
most.
think that's a very strong statement.
Mm,
But the issue is, I think the biggest difference between America's de facto one party state, where it's just two sides of the same coin, and it's based on the two sides hating the other. It's all based on hatred and dislike of the other. Whereas your one party state, in theory, it would have to have some level of like actual support. Whereas like one thing I propose is that in America, it'd be great if we had negative voting, right? Where instead of voting for a candidate, you were able to cast a negative vote against a candidate that would cancel out a vote. And then the second part of that is that anybody who has, you need at least one net vote in order to win. And of course, if we did this, nobody would come out of it with one net vote, except for a few like fringe third parties, maybe.
Oh,
But the two major parties, they would have negatives because
it
every single
sounds
person would rather
complicated,
vote against the
Spaceman.
other. It's not complicated. How is
It
that? It's
sounds
not
like
any
an
more complicated.
alternative, something transferable vote or something.
Well, basically, instead of me going to vote for Trump, I could vote against Hillary. And then that would be essentially like voting for Trump and every other third party, right? It'd be like voting plus one for everyone but the one party I don't like. Because that's what most people do in America. They're voting against the other.
Yeah,
Like
but
nobody's going to
I
vote
think the
for
Labour
Biden. They're
Party.
voting against Trump. And he ran that. That's it. That's what he's been running on. I'm the only one who can defeat Trump. His entire supporting base is anti-Trump.
Mhm.
Which Trump cleverly has sidestepped a lot of that momentum by giving people free gibs, because now you're seeing this like resurgence of black people who are like, oh cool, Trump gave us $1,200. Obama never gave me $1,200. And like that's literally the state of America, and on average is just like just throw them like some tiny chunk of change, some tiny insignificant amount of their money back, and then there you go. You just buy their votes. That's why I don't really feel bad for America. Like, there's not really any hope. Like America, they rejected liberty long ago. So whatever happens, happens.
But I think liberty for its own sake is not. I mean, pursuing liberty for its own sake is not um, particularly constructive. And all these ideas came from the French Revolution anyway, and well, is France doing that well? It had to change its constitution. We're now um, they're now on the Fifth Republic. So every time they change a constitution, they call themselves the next republic. So it's all these sort of little things, and you think, well, actually, if you just thought, if you based your constitution on the Quran, then you wouldn't keep changing things. You'd be less inclined to anyway. So, um, and
The
I
issue with
think this
liberty is
idea of pursuing happiness is probably going to turn into, well, it has turned into hedonism, hasn't it? And
yeah, but it
you
was
should
never really
pursue
based on that, right?
happiness.
And it's because we had Christians. It's because Christians they outsourced their morality to a book that they don't even read. Like, you know what I mean? It's like if I'm arguing with a Christian on Facebook, I'm kind of sitting here like, you claim that you believe God wrote a book, and you're sitting here reading what I write on Facebook. Like you have to know that you're full of shit. You don't actually believe in this. You have some ulterior psychological motive for following it. And I get that, it's very like it's not popular these days to do the whole atheism shtick. But it is important that the atheists won that argument, like,
And
and like now we
did
have
you
to
win the
revisit that whole
argument?
conversation, and it's very tiresome.
Well, the thing is, people want to believe. I mean, that's a thing, and I think all this taking a position on whether God exists or not is simply a choice of which rules we want to follow. So if we think, well, for the greater good, long-term national interest, we should follow what are believed to be God's laws, then you you will incline towards belief, because belief will help you obey these laws for longer than if you didn't believe.
Yeah, and that's why I promote cultural appropriation. I think that, if an argument can be made for some behavior that promotes something that's good, you can just make the argument. You don't have to sell it as a package deal. But I get that people who are promoting, a broader cultural and a broader tradition, they're going to say that, when you take that approach, something's going to get lost in translation. But I'm still optimistic that there's a way to cherry pick that's ultimately superior.
Do you think so? I think all these sort of changing in laws. It's kind of tinkering around the edges. It's all about okay. I would say that the political system is the operating system, and then what you can within that system change a few laws here and there. But if the operating system is completely wrong or less efficient than your competitor, then you really need to think about how to change it. And I would have thought all this sort of hoo-ha over China. It's like, well, they have a better, more effective operating system. And yeah, you can blame them for everything, but ultimately they are more rationally governed than you lot. And how you've been doing things for quite a long time now is not good, not even for your own people. And you forget the victims of American foreign policy, of which there are many. Your people don't like American foreign policy. They, of course, Israel is a big part of American foreign policy. It's a protectorate, but people don't realize it's a protectorate. Imagine if the Israelis said, well, we think Israel should be a theocracy. I think the CIA would, want to impose regime change on Israel if anyone dared to do that in Israel.
Maybe. I mean, but I don't know, because if it's a Jewish theocracy, I legitimately don't believe anyone in the American government would care.
Well, I think one of the reasons that given when people complain about Israel, I mean in the UK anyway, it's like, what's the point? Do you why do you support Israel? And the argument is always it's given by the politician concerned is like, well, Israel is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, and you think, yeah, and it drives the Arabs crazy because they hate it. Imagine if I don't know, Mexico became a theocracy, or Canada became a theocracy. You'd all go wild. I know you would. Or if okay, just communist. You'd all go crazy because it's like that thing
Well, by
we
my
hate.
standards, they
It's on our doorstep.
are.
Bloody hell. And that I think might have caused the Peloponnesian War because Sparta was had a different idea of government than the Athenians.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess immigration control would get more popular, right?
I mean that's the thing. It's like why are you doing this new liberalism shtick, which everybody hates anyway? The people who come to your country, well, they would rather be happier in their own country, working in their own society, and obviously, without having to deal with all these white Americans who hate them, and just give the jobs to the white American working class. Why don't you? Why not? You do have a working class, or don't you? Or has your working class become a welfare claiming class? And obviously,
I
if
think the
that has
reason we
happened,
can't do
then
that
you
is
make them
because of the
work
birth
again, and
rates.
you can only make them work by becoming a one-party state, right?
Well, that's the issue though, is that they bought all the votes for people to be like low IQ, just Gibbs-based voters by giving women the right to vote. And then they gave them all their abortions because they have to give women whatever they want. Whoever promises women more free things for no reason has an advantage. And then because of this, our birth rates are declining. So therefore, you have to import more people. You import people who you think are going to vote for you, right? So it all makes sense. I
Yeah,
think
so
once all
so
uh,
so really, it's gender relations that is the root of all your problems. So deal with it now. It's like, well, why are we, funding all these single mothers? Make them find a man to, you know, pay for their shit.
Well, and this goes back to the comment I made, before I hopped in here, which is it's not viable because anything you propose, if people perceive that it's going to inconvenience women,
Yeah, yeah, but
on
then
any level, it's not going to work.
well,
Like
you have to
nothing ever gets
say,
passed.
but you have to say it. Only a one-party state would restore the patriarchy, and I do say that. I've been
Right,
saying that for
but then
years.
you're just blinking it into existence, right? Because the question of political viability is a question of like can it be done practicably?
Well, yes, it can, but only if you do all these things. It's like, yes, spacepan, you can go to the moon, but only if you can get into a space shuttle, right? You know, it's not
Well, right, but then
actually
our question
impossible.
is
It's just like
like,
you're very unlikely to get into a space worthy vehicle. I mean, I can sort of say, well, keep climbing mountains, you might get to the moon, but that wouldn't be right. I mean, it's practical for you to climb mountains, easier for you to do that than to get into a space shuttle, for example. But it's the right answer. The answer is still the answer, even though we can't do it. So maybe somebody else can.
you're not going to get a one-party state based on secular Koranism. The
Okay,
only way
you
you
don't
could ever
have
have a
to.
one, what your one-party state, I mean, either you're going to have it like Trojan horse and a bunch of crap that people don't realize, and then somehow it has to maintain its popularity to such a
It
degree that no
doesn't.
other party will go against it. And the
No,
only
you
way
can
you can
still
do
have
that is by
elections,
making it about women.
You can still have elections. People will still be happy to vote, except that all the candidates will come from the same party, and people would still vote. And they would. They'll grumble a bit, and then you can say, well, only people who pay tax get to vote. So you won't be directly
See,
discriminating
no,
against
you're not,
women.
but you won't get away with that. You won't get away with that because people are going to know. They're going to immediately say this inconveniences women.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
people say
Okay,
that
so
about
so
stuff
you
that doesn't even
bribe the
make
women.
sense. But
Okay,
that's just like blatant. They're gonna know. They're gonna admit. They're gonna be like, no, women are a bunch of welfare sponges. How dare you discriminate against the welfare
no,
sponges?
they would say, well, what are they for? I mean, we can't be, breeding social parasites without. Well, I mean, what are they for? We can do without them. We can, make these people productive and organize them in a different way so they actually want to be productive. So they'll be
So you're gonna need
incentivized to be.
social engineering, right? So
Yeah, of course
social
it's social
engineering is like
engineering.
phase one. Well, okay, but if that's our step one, why not instead have social engineering that fosters a society of people who I don't know, they don't beat their children, so we're not beating the gray matter out of them at young ages, where people have a respect for property rights, where we have fewer government regulations that prevent people from gaining knowledge and skills in different trades, and no minimum wage so that they're able to enter the workforce. And we allow them to do it at younger ages so that our education has to compete with our training opportunities and our apprenticeships, right? Like there's all kinds of things that you can make
Yeah,
a
yeah.
solid argument for
Everybody hates
deregulating
immigration.
that'll foster.
So you have to say, okay, so this is a bargain. If you hate immigration, you'll have to produce enough uh, school leavers who are attractive to employers, not needs. And the only way you can produce decent school leavers is to make sure that they come from you know, families with fathers who are married to their mothers, who have a job, who are in some way capable of imposing order, or
Yeah,
some.
but even but I feel like, see, because the issue is once you start cracking down on the single motherhood and the welfare state, that's kind of like the last piece. That's something that's just it's not going to sell well, but you can sell to people, I think, getting rid of workplace laws, getting rid of minimum wage, getting rid of requirements for licenses and things like that. I feel like there's an argument to be made there, and then that actually creates a society where like bastards from single mother households, they actually could do fine. And even women could do fine and be somewhat competitive in a workforce like that where the government's not so much in the way. And these are things you could kind of sneak under the radar, and then you end up fostering a culture that's more libertarian, and then you eventually have people who are peaceful and high IQ enough, and even despite multiculturalism, culturally homogenous enough that they're going to understand that they don't need a government, and then they'll overthrow the parasitic class. That's kind of the how I'd prefer to see things go down. It seems like instead we're going to need to see a government totally collapse, and then we're going to have a de facto deregulated society once we realize the government can't enforce any of its policies, which is a little bit similar to some of what happens in China. You have kind of like a shadow of capitalism that's really doing a lot of good work there because there's just kind of an understanding that the government can't enforce all of its laws because
Mm-hmm.
it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing too is China could totally just like press a button and like become like the greatest country in the world if they would just like decide to. And I am absolutely perplexed as to why they don't just do it. Like they're literally right next to Hong Kong. They have the perfect example of how they could just create, a post scarcity society utopia on Earth at practically the push of a button, and they just don't do it because I don't know. I guess the political elites want to keep
Well,
their
I'm
special
saying it can
influence
be
or
managed,
something.
and you can't even get the women to agree and say, look, if you do things this way, you and your female descendants will have more marriageable men to choose from. But currently, with the way things are, there'll just be neats, degenerates, criminals, and bad boys that will just maybe be good for one night. So that's. I think the message can be managed, and also men can also collectively agree that if they're having a problem with immigration, then and it's a problem of not having enough babies, then have enough babies with good women and bring them up properly, and improve state education, and all these things they can't be done piecemeal as well. They have to be done all at the same time. Well, obviously you can't do them all at the same time, but you can at least put it to people that they have to be done in tandem with each other for the thing to work. I mean, there's no point lying to the people anymore. But Spaceman, I actually have to make another call at 11, and
Oh, sure,
I
sure.
can't stay. But yeah, it's been
Well,
a
hey,
great
thanks for having me on. I
conversation.
thought we had a nice
Yeah,
conversation here.
I thought it's been
I
really constructive.
I still think Claire, you should be a little nicer to Jen. I think that she'd be nicer to you if you were a little nicer to her. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I take your point. I do. I try to be nice to her, but she's not
And I
nice to
know
me.
sometimes I remember when the two of you were on my show a couple of weeks ago. There was a time when Jen took some pot shots at you, and I told her, "Wait a minute, Claire wasn't saying anything bad about you, right?"
Yeah,
So
yeah,
maybe it
and
is a
thank you for
little bit on
that.
both sides.
Yeah,
Like you said, we can all be a little rude at times.
yes. I do like Jen. I do care about her, and I think she is deliberately rude to me because she wants to assert her status over me, and she does it. I know she doesn't just do it to me. She does it to people who've crossed her, who like con ops, and yeah, I know she feels she has to do that, and I'm saying there's probably a more grown up way of doing things, rather than sicking your posse on other people. So I don't know. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's fair enough.
I mean, yeah,
Well, thanks
I
for
would
having
love
me
to
on.
get along with her better and interact with her in a more collegiate way. But I think she's determined to punish me forever for doubting her sanity.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens on the next episode.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, keep it easy.
You too. Thanks, Spacepan. Take care. Bye.